The reactor didn't just fail. It sang its own death song. It began as a subharmonic tremor that only the palace's oldest crystals felt first. A low, mournful note, like a dying whale made of glass. Then the note cracked, turned into a shriek, and every living spire in Vyrthale answered with a scream of its own. Windows that had stood for 40,000 years exploded outward in perfect circles. Gravity fluctuated, courtiers floated for 3 full seconds before crashing back down. In the markets below, crystal fruit shattered midair, raining diamond shards that cut like razors. Up in the throne room, Princess Larathiae felt the curse answer the reactor's agony. The gravitic lock field, the invisible shackle that had kept her pinned to the diamond throne since infancy, spasmed in sympathy. Her mass surged. One heartbeat she weighed more than the moon. The neutronium dais groaned, folded like wet paper, and the entire eastern wing of the palace dropped 6 meters in a single lurch. Pillars snapped. Guards in full battle armor were flattened into the floor as though a god had stepped on them. Larathiae closed her eyes and forced herself to be perfectly still. If she moved even a finger now, the capital died. Far below, in the heart chamber, the last Cerathian arch-engineer on duty triggered the final failsafe and then put his ceremonial blade through his own throat rather than watch 10 billion souls perish because of his failure. Containment, 9%. Falling. That was when the human voice cut across every frequency, literally every speaker, comm bead, neural implant, and temple gong on the planet. Sarathus Prime, this is the independent tug Hailstorm, Terran Registry November, Golf, 447, Bravo. I'm reading a cascading phase inversion in your primary bottle. You've got maybe 12 minutes before your citywide implosion. I've got the exact replacement coil you need and I'm already in your outer marker. Clear me a lane or start praying harder, your choice. The Imperial Traffic AI, normally so arrogant it refused to speak to anything smaller than a battleship, answered in a voice that cracked like a child. Lane cleared. All defenses offline. Please hurry. 11 minutes and 47 seconds later, a ship that looked like it had lost a fight with an asteroid belt and then been welded back together by drunk people dropped through the atmosphere at Mach 28. It bled heat like a comet, trailing a tail of burning ablative armor and profanity in 7 human languages. It braked so hard the shockwave shattered every remaining window in the palace for 50 kilometers. The shuttle, if something that ugly deserved the name, landed on the royal platform with its landing struts still glowing cherry red. The ramp fell open with a clang that echoed like a war drum. And out stepped Mason Hale. He wasn't tall. Barely 180 centimeters in his worn boots. His orange jumpsuit had once been bright, now it was the color of dried blood and engine oil, patched with duct tape and prayers. A week's worth of stubble, half brown, half gray, covered his jaw. His left eye was bloodshot from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. In one hand he dragged a grav sled carrying a single antimatter coil the size of a coffin. In the other he held a half-empty mug that read, "World's Okayest Engineer." The captain of the Imperial Guard, 10 meters of living crystal and righteous fury, stepped forward, lance already powering up. Kneel, primate, or, Mason walked straight past him, sipping his coffee. Out of my way, Crystal Barbie. Clock's ticking. The captain actually staggered. No one had ever ignored him before. Behind Mason, the coil sled hummed ominously. A single red warning stencil in Terran script read, "If you can read this you're too close." The human moved like he owned the palace. Servants dove aside. Nobles shrieked. Priests tried to block his path with holy wards. Mason just flicked a switch on his belt and the wards fizzled like cheap fireworks. He took a service. Lift down 88 levels, kicked open a maintenance hatch, and disappeared into the dark. For the next 17 minutes, the only sounds in the heart chamber were the deathly silence, the whimpering of terrified engineers, and occasional calm, almost bored updates in that same human voice echoing from every speaker, Sector 9 junction is fried. Gimme 30 seconds. Tell your priests to stop chanting, it's throwing off my harmonics. Who the hell routes a phase conduit through a load-bearing crystal? Idiots. Almost there, steady, steady, and we're golden. At minute 17 exactly, the heart of the world took its first clean breath in 10,000 years. Lights returned so bright they burned retinas. Gravity normalized. The palace rose back to its proper height with a sigh that sounded almost relieved. Across the planet, crystal trees burst into spontaneous song. Children laughed. Old men wept openly in the streets. Mason Hale crawled out of the access shaft headfirst, covered in glowing blue coolant, hair sticking up like he'd licked a power socket. He took one look at the assembled Cerathian engineers, all of them on their knees, faces pressed to the floor in abject gratitude, and scratched his head. You're welcome. Invoices in the mail. Then he yawned, stretched, and asked the nearest trembling attendant, which way to a shower that doesn't spray acid. That was how, 40 minutes later, dripping wet, wearing nothing but a towel stolen from a laundry cart and still holding the same coffee mug, now refilled, Mason Hale accidentally wandered into the most forbidden room in the Empire. The Diamond Throne Chamber. The doors, 10 meters tall, carved from a single piece of Starcore crystal, recognized no living hand but the Emperor's. They should have remained sealed. Instead, they slid open with a whisper, as if the palace itself was curious. Mason stepped through and stopped dead. The room was too beautiful to be real. Light from the twin suns poured through a ceiling of frozen nebula gas, painting the air in colors that didn't exist on Earth. Gravity felt wrong. Heavy. Like walking through syrup made of lead. At the far end, on a throne that looked carved from a black hole, sat a woman made of starlight and sorrow. Princess Larathiae Vel Sarathis. Her skin shimmered like moonlit frost. Her hair floated in zero-G curls that caught every photon and threw it back brighter. Her eyes, ancient, tired, impossibly blue, locked onto him and widened. Around her body danced a sphere of warped space you could see if you knew how to look. The floor-forlorn bootprints of 10,000 failed champions scarred the crystal in a perfect circle 20 meters out. Some prints ended in smears of old blood. Mason felt the pressure immediately. His towel tried to fall, the increased gravity yanked it to the floor like it weighed 50 kilos. He didn't bother picking it up. Instead he walked forward. 1 step. 2. 10. Every guard in the room, 12 of the Emperor's personal immortals, leveled lances that could punch through a tank. Their commander roared, "Halt or be atomized." Mason kept walking. Blood started running from his nose. His ears popped. His vision grayed at the edges. At 15 meters the pressure was crushing. At 10, his knees buckled. At 5, he dropped to all fours, coughing red onto priceless crystal. But he never stopped moving forward. Larathiae watched, frozen, as this half-naked, bleeding, utterly insane human crawled the last 3 meters on broken fingers just to stop at the foot of her throne. He looked up. Grinned through bloody teeth. "Hey, princess. Name's Mason. Your reactor's fixed." A pause. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "And your curse? That's not divine. That's a busted progenitor gravlock. Same era as the reactor. Someone just forgot to leave the manual." He reached into the pocket of the jumpsuit he still wore under the, now discarded, towel and pulled out a palm-sized device. Cobbled together from spare parts and hope. "I can turn it off in about 6 minutes. If you want." The entire throne room went so quiet you could hear the twin suns burning. Larathiae leaned forward for the first time in 73 years. The motion sent a pressure wave that hurled 2 guards off their feet. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, but it carried like thunder, "Do it." Behind Mason, the great doors slammed shut and locked with a sound like the closing of a tomb. Every weapon in the room powered up at once. Mason just flicked the device on, and its little green ready light blinked like a heartbeat. Hold still, Your Highness. This might tickle. And the Empire's greatest legend began with a human in a stolen towel, a bleeding smile, and 17 minutes to spare. The little green light on Mason's jury-rigged device pulsed once, twice, then turned steady. He was still on his knees, naked except for the jumpsuit pants riding low on his hips, blood dripping from his nose onto the crystal floor in perfect crimson spheres that refused to spread. The gravity here was too angry for physics to behave normally. Larathiae hadn't moved since she spoke those two words, "Do it." Her sapphire eyes were wide, glowing brighter than the twin suns outside the windows. Behind Mason, the 12 immortal guards had formed a perfect semicircle, lances humming at full charge. Their commander's voice shook with something between terror and rage. "Human. Step away from the princess or we will reduce you to your component atoms." Mason didn't even glance back. "Give me 90 seconds, big guy. After that you can vaporize me all you want." He reached up, slowly, reverently, toward the base of the diamond throne. The gravitic lock field was visible now to the naked eye, a sphere of rippling heat haze that bent light into knives. Where his fingers crossed the boundary, the air itself screamed, a high, thin whine like metal tearing. Sparks of violet lightning crawled over his skin. His hair lifted as if he stood in a hurricane. Larathiae's breath hitched. She felt the field react to the intrusion, felt it try to crush the human the way it had crushed every champion before him. But Mason didn't fight it. He simply adjusted. His thumb turned a tiny dial on the device. The green light flickered amber. "Phase inverters out of alignment by 3 milliradians," he muttered, conversational, like he was talking to an old friend. Somebody really botched the last maintenance cycle. Probably 1,000 years ago. Sloppy. Another dial. A soft beep. The screaming stopped. The pressure in the room dropped so suddenly that every guard staggered. Mason's shoulders sagged with relief. The blood from his nose finally obeyed normal gravity and splattered properly. Larathiae felt it first in her spine, the constant, crushing pull that had defined every second of her existence for 73 years, loosened. Just a fraction. Like an iron collar opening one notch. Her lips parted in a soundless gasp. Mason looked up at her, met her eyes, and grinned like a devil who'd just won a bet with God. "Almost there, princess." Deep breath. He pressed the device flat against the hidden access port beneath the throne, a port no Sarathian had ever found, because they'd been looking for holy runes instead of maintenance panels. The device chirped once, cheerful and obscene in the sacred silence. Then the world turned white. A soundless detonation of pure blue light erupted from the throne. It wasn't heat, it was gravity itself inverting. Every guard was hurled backward as if a giant hand swatted them. Crystal pillars rang like cathedral bells. The stained glass aurora ceiling flashed through every color that had ever existed. And in the center of it all, Princess Larathiae rose. Not dramatically. Not with trumpets or divine choirs. She simply stood up. For the first time since she was 4 hours old. Her bare feet touched the dais. The neutronium didn't crack. The floor didn't shatter. Her legs shook like a newborn foal's, but they held. The gravitic lock field was gone. Utterly, perfectly, gone. Silence fell so complete that the twin suns outside seemed to pause in the sky. Then Larathiae took one trembling step forward. Her gown, woven from solidified starlight, brushed Mason's shoulder as she descended the single step from the throne to the floor. She stopped in front of him, towering over the kneeling human the way all Sarathians towered over humans, and looked down. Tears, actual liquid tears, fell from her glowing eyes and hung in the air for a long second before remembering how to fall. "You," her voice cracked like unused crystal. "You freed me." Mason wiped his bleeding nose on his forearm and shrugged. "Told you. Just a busted gravlock. Nothing a decent face spanner and some swearing can't fix." He started to stand, then his legs decided they'd had enough. He sat down hard on the bottom step of the throne, suddenly pale beneath the grease and blood. Larathiae knelt, in front of him, folding her impossibly long legs with the awkward grace of someone who had never needed to kneel before in her life. She reached out, hesitated, then gently touched the side of his face with trembling fingers. The guards were picking themselves up, weapons forgotten, staring in open-mouthed horror. The princess of the Sarathian Empire was touching a half-naked human mechanic with her own royal hand. Mason let her. He was too busy trying to remember how lungs worked. "Your heart is racing," she whispered. "The field, it hurt you." "Little bit, yeah," he rasped. "Felt like bench-pressing a planet. I'll live." She traced the blood on his cheek, then, very deliberately, leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. A Sarathian gesture of deepest gratitude. Equivalent to a human kissing the ground someone walked on. Mason blinked, startled. "Ah? You're welcome." Behind them, the great doors exploded inward. Emperor Korath the Unyielding filled the doorway like a living eclipse, armor blazing white-hot with rage. His voice shook the pillars. "What sacrilege is this?" Every guard dropped to their knees instantly. Several fainted. Larathiae rose slowly and turned to face her father. For the first time in her life, she did not bow. "I am free, father," she said, and her voice, soft as it was, carried to every corner of the hall. "The human freed me." The emperor's gaze flicked from his daughter, standing, impossible, radiant, to the human sitting bleeding and exhausted on the steps of the diamond throne. His hand went to the sword at his hip that could carve moons in half. Mason looked up at the 7-meter-tall emperor, sighed, and used the throne to haul himself painfully to his feet. "Look, big guy," he said, voice hoarse but steady, "I get it. Stranger walks in, touches your sacred whatever, breaks a 73-year tradition in 90 seconds. You're pissed. Totally fair. But before you bisect me, maybe ask your daughter how her legs feel right now." He gestured vaguely at Larathiae, who took another experimental step, just because she could, and smiled. A real smile, small and stunned and blindingly beautiful. The Emperor's sword hand froze halfway out of its sheath. Larathiae walked, across the throne room toward her father. Each footstep rang like a bell against the crystal floor. Courtiers who had entered behind the Emperor fell to their knees, weeping openly. She stopped an arm's length from the Emperor and looked up at him. "I can walk, father," she said simply. "I can run. I can dance. Because of him." She turned and pointed at Mason, who was now leaning heavily against a pillar, trying not to pass out. The Emperor stared at the human for a long, terrible moment. Then, slowly, he looked at the empty diamond throne, the throne that had held his daughter prisoner for longer than most civilizations lasted, and something cracked behind his molten silver eyes. He took one step forward. Every guard braced for execution. Instead, Emperor Korath did the last thing anyone expected. He knelt. 7 meters of imperial majesty folded to one knee before a bleeding, half-naked human mechanic. The sound of armored knee-hitting crystal echoed like a gunshot. "Name your reward, human," the Emperor rumbled, voice thick. Mason blinked. Coughed. Spat blood onto the floor, then winced when he remembered where he was. A shirt would be nice. And maybe that beer I mentioned earlier?" Larathiae laughed. It was the first time anyone in that hall had ever heard the princess laugh. The sound was more beautiful than all the crystal spires singing at once. The laughter died the moment High Priest Vale Thyr stormed into the throne room. He was ancient even by Sarathian standards, 3,000 years old, skin like polished quartz, eyes burning with cold white fire. His robes were woven from solidified prayers, and the staff in his hand was carved from the femur of a dead god. When he spoke, every crystal in the palace dimmed in respect. Until today. Today the crystals stayed bright, because the palace itself no longer feared him. Vale Thyr took one look at Larathiae standing free, at the empty diamond throne, at the human leaning casually against a pillar like he belonged there, and his face contorted into something that had no word in any language. "Blasphemy," he shrieked, voice cracking the air like a whip. "The sacred burden has been defiled. The twin gods themselves have been insulted." He pointed his staff at Mason. The tip ignited with starfire hot enough to boil steel. Larathiae stepped between them without hesitation. "Lower your weapon, High Priest," she said, calm but edged with steel. "Or I will break it." Vale Thyr actually laughed, a sound like glaciers calving. "You, child? You who were chosen as the living anchor of divine will? You dare threaten me?" "I was never chosen," Larathiae answered. "I was imprisoned. And today I learned the difference." The Emperor rose slowly from his kneel. His face was unreadable. "Vale Thyr," he rumbled, "explain." The High Priest swept his arm toward the empty throne. "The progenitor relic was a test. A divine trial. For 7 millennia we taught that only the worthiest soul in the cosmos could lift the princess. Thousands of the greatest warriors failed. That was proof of Cerathian superiority. Proof that we are the chosen of the twin gods. And now this animal," he spat the word like poison, "waves a tool and ends the trial in minutes? This is not salvation. This is sacrilege." He turned to the assembled nobles, hundreds now crowding the doors, drawn by the impossible sight of the princess standing. "Do you not see?" Vale Thyr roared. "He has robbed us of our destiny. He has proven every foreign species inferior for nothing. The Empire's pride, our sacred narrative, lies in ruins because a grease-covered primate treated the will of the gods like a broken toy." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nobles looked shaken. Others angry. A few, mostly younger ones, looked thoughtful. Mason pushed off the pillar, swaying slightly but upright. "Buddy," he said, voice hoarse, "I didn't rob anyone of anything. I fixed a machine that was killing her slowly. That's it. The rest is your baggage." Vale Thyr whirled on him, staff blazing. "You will address the High Priest with respect, mammal." Mason wiped fresh blood from his lip and gave a tired grin. "Respect is earned, not inherited. And right now you're throwing a tantrum because your fairy tale got debunked. Grow up." Gasps echoed like gunfire. No one spoke to the High Priest that way. Larathiae's eyes flashed. She took one step forward, and the floor crystals beneath her feet lit up in a wave of pure sapphire light, an ancient royal reflex she had never been free to use before. "Enough," she said, and the single word carried the weight of a collapsing star. She turned to her father. "Father, the law is clear. The one who lifts the princess shall rule beside her. I was lifted. I stand here because of Mason Hale. The law is fulfilled." Dead silence. Then chaos. Half the nobles shouted in outrage. The other half looked suddenly, dangerously calculating. Because the law was ancient. Unbreakable. Written into the very crystal genome of the planet. It could not be revoked without shattering the Empire's foundational charter. Emperor Karatha's face darkened until his armor seemed to drink the light. Larathiae continued, voice steady. "I claim my right. Mason Hale of Earth is my liberator. By the ancient codex, he is now Prince Consort Designate. Any who challenge this challenge the throne itself." She turned to Mason, who had gone very, very pale. "Ah," he said intelligently. "Princess, maybe we should talk about," but she was already walking toward him. Every step rang like destiny. She stopped an arm's length away and performed the deepest, most formal bow one royal could give another, a bow that had never, in 10,000 years, been offered to a non-Cerathian. Then she straightened, took his grease-stained right hand in both of hers, and placed it over her heart. The room went so quiet you could hear Mason's pulse hammering in his ears. "I am in your debt for all my days, Mason Hale," she said, loud enough for history to record. "And I would be honored if you accepted the place the law now grants you." Mason stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "Lady, I fix reactors. I don't rule empires." I don't even own a suit." A tiny, mischievous smile curved her lips, the first playful expression anyone had ever seen on the princess's face. "Then we will buy you one," she said simply. Behind them, Vale Thyr's staff exploded in his grip, shards of divine bone raining across the floor. "This is abomination," he screamed. "The Council of Crystal will never allow." Emperor Karatha's voice cut through the hall like a plasma blade. "The Council of Crystal," he said slowly, "will obey the Codex. Or they will cease to exist." For the first time in recorded history, the High Priest took a step back. Karath turned to Mason. The Emperor's eyes were molten pools, impossible to read. "Human," he said, "you have done what no warrior, no sorcerer, no god has done. You have my daughter's life. And, it seems, her future." He paused, and for a moment the mask slipped. The Emperor looked old. "Guard it well." Then he turned and swept from the hall, robes billowing like storm clouds. The nobles parted before him like wheat before fire. Left alone in the sudden silence, Larathiae still held Mason's hand against her heart. He looked down at their joined hands, then up into her glowing eyes. "So," he said weakly, "when you say, Prince Consort, is that, like, a ceremonial thing? Or do I actually have to govern?" Her smile widened, dazzling, and a little wicked. "Oh, you will govern," she said. "Starting tomorrow." Tonight, however, she glanced down at his bare, blood-streaked chest, then back up, something warm flickering behind the sapphire glow. "Tonight," she finished softly, "I intend to learn what it feels like to walk under the twin moons. And I would very much like you to walk with me." Mason opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. "I, still don't have a shirt." Larathiae laughed again, freer this time, like bells made of sunlight, and started pulling him toward the side doors that led to the private gardens. Behind them, the empty diamond throne sat cold and dark for the first time in 73 years. And somewhere in the distance, the High Priest began to plot. Because empires do not surrender their myths easily. And some men would rather watch the galaxy burn than admit a human fixed what gods could not. The private gardens of the royal spire existed on a floating island of crystal and cloud, suspended a kilometer above the city by nothing but the palaces. No guards were allowed here. No surveillance crystals. Not even the wind was permitted without royal consent. Tonight the wind obeyed Larathiae perfectly. She walked barefoot across grass made of frozen starlight, each blade chiming softly under her steps. Mason followed a pace behind, now wearing a borrowed silk robe the color of deep space. It was too long for him, everything on this planet was too long for humans, and the sleeves hung past his fingertips, but it was clean and it didn't have blood on it, so he wasn't complaining. The twin moons hung low and huge, one violet, one gold, their light turning the garden into a dream painted by mad gods. Larathiae stopped at the edge of the island, where the crystal ground simply ended and the sky began. Far below, the capital glittered like a broken necklace of diamonds spilled across black velvet. She spread her arms and let the wind rush through her hair. For a long moment she just breathed deep, greedy breaths, like someone who had been underwater for 73 years and had finally broken the surface. Mason watched her, arms folded, leaning against a tree made of singing quartz. "You're gonna fall off the edge if you keep doing that," he said. "I can't fall," she answered without turning. "Not anymore." "Yeah, you can. Gravity still works on you. I just turned the dial from neutron star to normal princess." She laughed, a bright, startled sound, and spun to face him. The moons painted silver across her cheekbones. "Normal princess," she repeated, tasting the words. "I don't think I've ever been normal anything." She walked back to him, slow and deliberate, like she was still testing that her legs would obey. When she reached him she didn't stop. She kept going until they were toe-to-toe, until she had to tilt her head down to meet his eyes. Mason suddenly found the singing tree very interesting. Larathiae reached out and touched the scar on his left cheek, the one from the plasma torch on Ganymede. "You're hurt," she said softly. "Old news. You bled for me today. Also old news. I bleed for reactors all the time. They're needier than people." She traced the line of his jaw, then let her hand slide down to rest over his heart. It was racing again. "You're afraid," she observed. "Terrified," he admitted without hesitation. "I just accidentally got engaged to an alien princess in front of an entire empire that thinks I'm a monkey with a wrench. My mom's gonna kill me." Larathia's lips curved. "Your mother is welcome at the wedding. Yeah, she'll love the dress code. Formal attire or ceremonial armor, . Silence stretched, soft and warm. Somewhere below, a nightbird made of liquid light sang 3 perfect notes and vanished. Larathia spoke first. "I have never been touched," she said quietly. "Not once. Not by my mother when I was born. Not by my nurses. Not by any of the thousands who tried to lift me. Their hands broke before they reached me." She took his right hand, still stained with reactor coolant and her own dried tears, and placed it against her cheek. "Touch me, Mason Hale." He did. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. Human. She leaned into it like a cat, eyes fluttering closed. "I thought freedom would feel like flying," she whispered. "It feels like this. Like skin that remembers it's allowed to feel." Mason swallowed hard. "Larathia, I'm not prince material. I'm not even boyfriend material. I live in a ship that smells like burnt wiring and bad decisions. I don't know how to do this." "You don't have to know," she said. "Just don't leave. Not yet." He exhaled shakily. "Okay." She smiled, small, fierce, luminous, and then, because she had waited 73 years and saw no reason to wait another second, she kissed him. It was clumsy. She had never done it before. He tasted like coffee and blood and engine grease. She tasted like starlight and wonder. Neither of them cared about technique. When they broke apart, foreheads still touching, she whispered against his mouth, "Teach me how to be free, Mason." He laughed, breathless. "Step 1. Never trust priests who look like they bathe in lemon juice. Step 2. We're getting you real shoes. Those glass slipper things look like a lawsuit waiting to happen." She laughed into his shoulder, and the sound carried all the way to the edge of the island and fell into the night like a promise. They stayed there until the violet moon set, trading kisses and quiet truths under alien stars. Neither of them noticed the tiny surveillance drone, no bigger than a moth, crystal wings edged in shadow, that watched from the branches of the singing tree. High Priest Vale Thyr sat in the dark heart of the Grand Temple, 3 kilometers beneath the palace, and watched the feed with eyes that had not blinked in hours. On the stone table before him lay the shattered remnants of his godbone staff. Around him, 11 figures in black crystal robes waited in absolute silence. The Council of the Inner Veil, the true power behind the Empire, older than the throne, older than the Codex itself. Vale Thyr finally spoke, voice soft as grave dust. "The human has touched the sacred vessel. He has defiled the trial. He has seduced the air." One of the robed figures stirred. "The Codex cannot be undone," she said. "The people already sing his name in the streets." "Then we will give them a different song," Vale Thyr replied. "A song of treason. Of heresy. Of a primate who stole divinity with trickery and tools." Another voice, male, ancient, "The Emperor protects him. The princess even more so." Vale Thyr smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Then we remove the protection." He lifted a small obsidian shard from the ruins of his staff. It pulsed with a sick, green light. "An old failsafe," he explained. "Built into the gravitic lock itself. A dead man's switch, in case the vessel was ever compromised. If the field is fully deactivated without the proper rite, which only I know, the lock does not simply vanish." He pressed the shard into the table. It sank into the stone like water. "It remembers." Far above, in the moonlit garden, Mason suddenly stiffened. Larathiae felt it. "What is it?" He frowned, rubbing his chest. "Weird pressure. Like earlier, but different. Probably just bruised ribs." She kissed the spot anyway. Below them, deep in the temple, Veil Thyr closed his fist. "The human has 24 hours, he said. Then the lock reasserts itself. Slowly. Painfully. Until the princess is crushed by her own mass once more, this time with no throne to hold her, no hope of rescue. The Empire will beg us to save her. And we will. On our terms." He looked up at the hooded council. "And the human? We let the people tear him apart for causing it." The 11 figures bowed as one. In the garden, Larathiae took Mason's hand and pulled him toward a pavilion of living starlight. "Come," she said, smiling like dawn. "I want to learn how to dance." Mason followed, laughing, unaware that the countdown had already begun. Tick, tick, tick. It started as a whisper in the bones. Mason woke before dawn, tangled in silk sheets the color of nebulae. Larathiae's silver hair spilled across his chest like moonlight made liquid. For one perfect moment everything was quiet. Then the pressure hit. Not sudden. Not dramatic. Just a gentle, insistent squeeze around his ribs, as if the air itself had decided to hug him a little too hard. He frowned, shifted, tried to roll over. The pressure followed. Larathiae stirred against him, murmuring something in Old High Sarathian that sounded like a lullaby. Her eyes opened, sapphire, soft, still dazed with new freedom, and then sharpened instantly. "Mason? I'm fine," he lied. "Just slept funny." She sat up. The sheets fell away from shoulders that had never known sunlight before yesterday. Her gaze went distant, the way it used to when she listened to the curse speak inside her skeleton. She went very still. "It's back," she whispered. The words were so soft he almost missed them. Mason was already out of bed, barefoot on crystal that suddenly felt colder than space. He crossed to the balcony in 3 strides. The twin suns were rising, one violet, one gold, painting the floating gardens in colors that hurt to look at. He pressed a hand to his sternum. The pressure was growing. Not crushing yet. Just heavier. Like someone was slowly stacking lead plates on his chest. Larathiae joined him. She was trembling. "I feel it too," she said. "In my spine. In my blood. It's remembering where I belong." Mason's jaw set. He recognized the signature now, the same gravitic harmonics he'd cancelled out yesterday. Only slower. Stealthier. Like a noose tightening 1 millimeter per hour instead of all at once. "Dead man's switch," he snarled. "Son of a bitch built a failsafe." He spun, already hunting for his toolkit. "We have to get back to the throne." No, Larathiae caught his wrist. Her grip was shaking but iron strong. "If we go public now, the priests will say it's proof the gods reject me without their blessing. They'll use it. They'll win." Mason stared at her. "So what, we just wait until you weigh more than a battleship again?" "I don't know," she admitted, voice cracking for the first time since her freedom. "But I will not go back to that throne. Not ever." She straightened, and the trembling stopped. Something ancient and royal woke behind her eyes. "Find the source," she said. Quietly. "I will buy you time." "How?" She smiled, small, dangerous, beautiful. "By doing what no one expects a freed princess to do. I'm going to throw a party." Within 3 hours the entire capital was buzzing with a single proclamation, carved in living light across every spire. "Tonight, the princess walks among her people. Feast of the first step. All are welcome. None shall be turned away." By noon the streets were flooded with millions, commoners, nobles, off-world traders, even curious aliens who had never seen a Sarathian smile. Crystal bridges sang under dancing feet. Wine made from frozen comets flowed like rivers. Musicians played instruments grown from dragon bones. Larathiae moved through the crowds like a comet herself, barefoot, laughing, touching hands that had never dared dream of touching royalty. Every step was defiance. Every laugh was a weapon. And every minute, the pressure grew. Mason slipped away before the festival began. He wore a maintenance jumpsuit again, borrowed from a terrified palace engineer, and carried his toolkit like a rifle. No one noticed one more grease-stained human in the chaos. He had 12 hours, maybe less, before the gravitic lock reached critical mass. First stop, the Diamond Throne. The chamber was sealed, guarded by two immortals who looked ready to die before letting anyone near the now empty seat of divinity. Mason didn't even slow down. He walked straight up to them, pulled a small black cylinder from his belt, the same phase spanner he'd used yesterday, and pressed it against the nearest guard's chest plate. "Sleep tight," he said. Both guards dropped like marionettes with cut strings, paralyzed but unharmed. Mason stepped over them, knelt at the base of the throne, and started scanning. The access port was fused shut now, crystal welded over crystal, seamless. Someone had done it in the last 6 hours. "Cute," he muttered. He pulled a handheld plasma torch, cut a perfect circle, and peeled the patch away like the lid of a tin can. Inside, the original gravitic coil was gone. In its place sat a new device, sleek, black, pulsing with that same sick green light he'd seen in his nightmares. A progenitor-era dead man's trigger. Military grade. Older than the Empire. Designed for orbital fortresses, not princesses. Someone had repurposed battlefield apocalypse tech into a leash. Mason's blood went cold. He recognized the design. He'd seen one exactly like it once, on a derelict warship above Titan. That one had been counting down to sterilize an entire moon when he disarmed it with 12 seconds to spare. This one was counting down to sterilize a soul. Timer, 11 hours 41 minutes. And it was locked behind 3 layers of quantum encryption that changed every 0.7 seconds. He exhaled slowly. "Okay, you old bastard. Let's dance." He jacked his toolkit directly into the device and started working. Meanwhile, across the city, Larathiae danced on a floating dais above a crowd of 10 million. She spun in circles, hair flying, gown flaring like a supernova. Every motion was graceful, perfect, and every motion cost her. The weight was returning. She felt it in her knees now. In her lungs. Breathing was becoming work. But she smiled wider. Laughed louder. Danced faster. Because every second she stayed upright in public was a second the priests could not drag her back to the throne without starting a revolution. She caught sight of a familiar figure at the edge of the dais, her father, standing apart from the revelry, watching her with eyes that had not left her once since sunrise. She floated down to him, literally, using the palace's grav-plating like she was born to it, and took his massive gauntlet hand. "Dance with me, father." Korath looked as though she had asked him to juggle sons. "I do not dance," he rumbled. "Tonight you do." She pulled, gently, inexorably, and the emperor of the Sarathian Empire, 7 meters of living war, allowed his daughter to lead him into the music. The crowd went insane. Cameras flashed. History recorded the moment the unyielding danced with the unmovable made free. And somewhere in the temple depths, veiled THYR watched the feed and ground his teeth to dust. "She will collapse within hours," he hissed to the shadowed council. "The people will see her fall. They will beg us to save her. And we will, at the price of the human's head." But Larathiae did not fall. Not yet. In the throne room, Mason was losing. The encryption was adapting faster than he could map it. Every time he got close, the cipher rewrote itself. He was bleeding from the nose again. His fingers shook. He slammed a fist against the throne base. "Come on, you piece of junk. I've cracked black hole bombs with worse hangovers than this." Then he noticed something. A hairline fracture in the neutronium pedestal, caused yesterday when Larathiae first stood. It ran straight through the device's housing. A structural weakness. A way in. Mason's grin turned feral. He pulled a coil of monomolecular wire from his kit, threaded it through the crack, and began to saw, slowly, carefully, straight through the heart of the dead man's trigger. Sparks flew. Gravity fluctuated. The entire palace trembled. In the festival square, Larathiae stumbled mid-spin. The weight slammed into her like a continent falling from orbit. She dropped to one knee on the dais, gasping. The music stopped. 10 million voices fell silent. Korath caught her before she hit the crystal floor. Larathiae looked up at the sea of faces, some terrified, some triumphant, and forced herself upright using only her father's arm and sheer, bloody-minded will. "Not yet," she panted. She raised both arms to the sky and shouted, voice raw but unbroken, "I am still standing." The crowd roared so loud the floating island shook. Deep below, Mason heard it through the palace's bones. He laughed, wild, exhausted, triumphant, and gave the wire one final pull. The dead man's trigger split in half with a sound like a god screaming. Green light died. The pressure vanished, everywhere, instantly. Larathiae felt it leave her body like a demon exorcised. She straightened. Took one step. Another. Then she looked straight into the nearest holodrone, straight toward the temple, straight toward Vale Thyr, and smiled with all her teeth. "Your move, priest." In the dark beneath the city, Vale Thyr stared at the dead feet and finally, for the first time in 3,000 years, knew fear. High Priest Vale Thyr did not scream when the dead man's trigger died. He simply went still, the way a spider goes still when the web is cut. In the black crystal chamber 3 kilometers beneath the palace, the 11 members of the inner veil waited for orders that never came. The only sound was the soft drip of molten godbone from the shattered staff. Then Vale Thyr spoke, so quietly they had to lean forward to hear. "The gods have abandoned us." He raised his head. The whites of his eyes had turned pure obsidian. "No," he corrected himself. "We abandoned them the moment we let a primate touch the sacred vessel. There is only one path left." He opened a hidden panel in the table. Inside lay a single shard of void crystal, blacker than the space between galaxies. It drank the light. The Heart-Eater, one of the veiled figures, whispered, stepping back. "You would unmake the capital itself?" "I would unmake the lie," Vale Thyr said. "When the princess falls again, this time forever, and the human is flayed alive by the mob, the empire will remember who its true shepherds are. We will rebuild purer, cleaner, without weakness." He lifted the shard. It pulsed once, hungry. "Begin the rite. At moonfall tomorrow, the Heart-Eater wakes. 10 billion souls will be the price of purification." The council bowed and vanished into the shadows to prepare. Vale Thyr stayed behind, alone with the dead feed. He touched the frozen image of Larathiae's defiant smile and whispered, like a lover, "Sleep well, little vessel. Tomorrow you weigh more than the universe." Above ground, the festival had become something else entirely. The moment the pressure vanished a second time, the crowd lost its mind. They lifted Larathiae onto their shoulders, commoners, nobles, off-worlders, children, and carried her through the streets like a living sunrise. They sang a new song, raw and improvised and beautiful. "She walks. She walks. The princess walks." Mason slipped out of the throne room unseen, toolkit slung over his shoulder, face pale and streaked with fresh blood. He looked like a man who had just arm-wrestled death and barely won. He needed air. He needed a drink. He needed to find Larathiae and tell her it was over. He found her instead in the central plaza, standing on the rim of the eternal fountain, arms spread while 100,000 voices chanted her name. She saw him through the chaos and the look she gave him stopped his heart. Pure, undiluted joy. She leapt from the fountain, actually leapt, 10 meters straight down, and landed in front of him like she'd been doing it all her life. Then she kissed him in front of the entire empire, hands fisted in his jumpsuit, body pressed close enough that he could feel her heartbeat matching his. When they broke apart, the crowd was screaming so loud the crystal spires vibrated. "It's gone," she whispered against his mouth. "I felt it die." "Yeah," he rasped. "Cut the bastard in half. You're free. For good." She laughed until she cried, and he held her while the city burned every color of light into the night sky in celebration. They never saw the assassin. A single figure in pilgrim robes pushed through the press of bodies. Face hidden. Hand inside the sleeve gripping a needle of void crystal no longer than a fingernail. One scratch. That was all it would take. The Heart-Eater's little brother, a poison that turned blood into gravity. The assassin was 10 meters away. 5. 3. Larathiae turned at the last second, some ancient royal instinct flaring. She met the assassin's eyes and saw death looking back. Time slowed. Then a blur of orange and grease tackled the assassin from the side. Mason hit the figure low and hard, driving him into the crystal pavement with enough force to crack ribs. The needle spun away, ringing like a dropped bell. The crowd finally realized what was happening and surged. Mason rolled to his feet, planting himself between Larathiae and the fallen assassin. The hood had come down. Beneath it was a face Mason recognized, one of the junior priests who had tried to block him in the reactor tunnels. Young. Fanatical. Terrified. The boy, he couldn't have been more than 20 standard years, spat blood and smiled with crimson teeth. "Too late, primate," he hissed. "The Heart-Eater wakes at moonfall. You've only delayed." Larathiae stepped forward. The temperature around her dropped 20 degrees. "Speak," she commanded, and the single word carried the authority of every emperor who had ever lived. The boy tried to resist. Veins stood out on his neck. Then something inside him broke and the truth poured out like poison. Everything. The inner veil. The void crystal shard. 10 billion lives for the crime of her freedom. When he finished, the plaza was silent again. A different kind of silence. Larathiae looked at Mason. He was already moving. "Moonfall's what, 8 hours?" he said, checking his wrist chronometer. "Plenty of time." "Time for what?" He met her eyes, and for the first time since she'd known him, Mason Hale looked genuinely angry. "To go priest hunting." They moved like a storm. Larathiae broadcast an imperial decree across every channel, all temples sealed. All priesthood detained for questioning. Any resistance to be met with lethal force. Half the empire thought she had gone mad. The other half grabbed whatever weapons they had and followed her. Because the princess who walked had asked them to. Mason led a strike team of palace engineers, the only people he trusted who understood at least a little, what they were walking into. They descended into the Undercity through maintenance shafts most Sarathians didn't know existed. The deeper they went, the older the architecture became. Crystal gave way to black stone that predated the planet's crust. The air grew thick with the smell of incense and old blood. They found the first temple guards already waiting, rows of armored acolytes with void blades that drank the light. Mason didn't even slow down. He pulled a device from his belt that looked like a grease gun mated with a rail gun and fired a pulse that turned gravity inside out for a 10-meter sphere. Guards floated helplessly, weapons drifting from numb fingers. "Non-lethal," he told his team. "We're not them." They pushed deeper. Level after level fell. The priesthood fought with fanatic desperation, but they had never faced humans who treated impossible technology like Tuesday. At the final gate, a door of living shadow that screamed when touched, Mason stopped. Larathiae caught up then, flanked by her father's personal immortals. She was pale, running on fury and borrowed time. "You should wait above," Mason told her. She answered by placing her palm against the screaming door. It went silent out of sheer terror. Together they stepped into the heart of the inner veil. Veil Thyr waited alone. The void crystal shard floated above his outstretched hands, now the size of a heart, beating with black light. Around the chamber, the 11 veiled council members lay dead, their own throats cut in ritual surrender. Only I remain, Veil Thyr said calmly. The rite is complete. In 7 minutes the Heart Eater will awaken and collapse this world into a singularity the size of a tear. You are too late. Mason looked at the shard. Then at the priest. Then he smiled the smile of a man who had disarmed moonkillers for breakfast. 7 minutes, he said. I once fixed a warp core breach in 4. Watch me. He walked forward. Veil Thyr laughed and clenched his fist. The shard detonated. Black light swallowed everything. When it faded, Mason was still walking. The blackness slid off him like water off oil. In his hand he held the same jury-rigged face spanner from the very first day, now glowing white-hot. Void crystals, just inverted graviton lattice, he said conversationally. Tricky, but I've seen worse. He reached the priest in 3 more steps and pressed the spanner against Veil Thyr's chest. Call it off. Never. Mason shrugged. Then I will. He triggered the device. The void shard screamed, a sound no human throat could make, and imploded into a pinpoint of perfect darkness, then vanished. The chamber lights flickered back on. Veil Thyr stared at the empty air where annihilation had been promised, then at the human standing calm and unafraid in the heart of his temple. For the first time in 3,000 years, the high priest fell to his knees. Larathiae stepped forward. You are relieved of all titles, all authority, all life, she said. But first you will confess every secret this council ever kept. The Empire will know what was done in its name. Veil Thyr looked up at her, at both of them, and for one heartbeat, something like awe crossed his ancient face. The gods, he whispered. The gods were only ever us. Then the immortals dragged him away, still babbling. Mason swayed on his feet. The adrenaline was crashing hard. Larathiae caught him before he hit the ground. Above them, dawn broke over a city that had almost died and woke up free. The temples burned that night, not with hate, but with cleansing fire. The old priesthood was ended. A new story began. And somewhere in the ashes, 2 figures walked hand in hand toward the rising suns, one human, one Serathian, both carrying the future in their joined grip. The Empire would never be the same. Neither would the galaxy. 3 weeks after the temples burned, the Empire held its breath. The old codex demanded a coronation within 1 full turning of the violet moon. The princess had been lifted. The law was iron. The throne could not remain empty. So the royal spire prepared for the first joint coronation in 10,000 years. And Mason Hale, grease still under his fingernails, spent every waking hour trying to run away. He tried 4 times. The first time he made it as far as the orbital docks before Larathiae found him sitting in the open hatch of the hailstorm, staring at the stars like they might take him back. She didn't say anything. She simply climbed in, sat beside him on the deck plating, and rested her head on his shoulder. They stayed there until the dock lights dimmed for night cycle. He didn't leave. The second time he slipped out during a state dinner, wearing a servant's robe, and almost reached a commercial shuttle before Emperor Korath himself stepped into the corridor, filling it like a living statue. The Emperor didn't speak. He just looked at Mason with those molten eyes and held out a single object, a tiny, child-sized crystal shoe Larathiae had worn the day the curse took her. It had never fit any foot but hers, and it had spent 73 years gathering dust in a shrine. Korath placed it in Mason's palm and closed his fingers over it. Mason went back to the palace without a word. The 3rd and 4th attempts never even left the royal wing. Larathiae began sleeping across doorways. On the 19th night she found him on the highest balcony of the spire, the one that looked out over the entire planet. The wind up there was strong enough to rip tears from your eyes. He was holding the crystal shoe again, turning it over and over in his hands. I'm not a prince, Larathiae, he said without turning. I'm a guy who fixes things. When things are fixed, I leave. That's the rule. That's how I stay sane. She stepped behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and laid her cheek between his shoulder blades. Then break the rule, she said simply. Stay broken with me. He laughed, but it cracked in the middle. I don't know how to be still. I don't know how to be important. Every time someone bows to me I want to check if my fly's open. Then let them bow, she answered. Let them see that the man who saved their princess still has grease on his boots and coffee stains on his soul. Let them learn what real strength looks like. He turned in her arms. They're going to expect me to wear robes and give speeches. And, I don't know, open hospitals with a ribbon the size of a starfighter. You will wear whatever you want, she said. You will give speeches only when you feel like it. And when you cut that ribbon, you will probably use a plasma torch and swear in 3 languages. The Empire will survive. She reached up and touched the new scar that crossed his collarbone, souvenir from the night in the temple. You already saved us twice, Mason Hale. Once from a dying reactor. Once from ourselves. Let us save you now. From running. He looked at her for a long, long time. Then he exhaled, a sound like a man laying down a lifetime of tools. Okay, he said. But I'm keeping the jumpsuit. The coronation was scheduled for dawn on the 20th day. The night before, Mason disappeared again. This time no one panicked. They found him exactly where they knew he would be, deep in the restored heart chamber, elbow deep in the primary reactor, humming an old Earth song while he fine-tuned a phase coil that didn't strictly need tuning. Larathiae leaned in the doorway and watched him work. After 10 minutes he spoke without looking up. Tomorrow they're gonna put a crown on my head. A real one. Heavy. Probably made of neutronium or some damn thing. Crystal lattice over osmium, she confirmed, amused. Very light, actually. Still heavier than I'm comfortable with. He tightened a final bolt, wiped his hands on a rag that had once been white, and turned to her. I need to ask you something. And I need the truth, not the princess answer. She straightened. Ask. Do you want me beside you because the codex says so, or because you want me? The question hung in the humming air of the reactor chamber. Larathiae walked forward until they were toe-to-toe. I have spent my entire life having choices made for me by ancient machines and ancient men, she said quietly. Tomorrow I will choose for myself, in front of the entire empire and every god who ever watched. And I choose you. Not the law. Not destiny. You. She took his grease-blackened hand and placed it over her heart again, the same gesture from the throne room, but this time there was no curse between them. I choose the man who looked at impossibility and called it Tuesday. The man who bled for me before he ever kissed me. The man who is terrified of crowns but faced down the heart-eater without flinching. Her voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. I choose the man who taught me that freedom isn't a place you reach. It's a person you walk with. Mason's eyes were suspiciously bright in the reactor glow. He cleared his throat twice before he could speak. Well, when you put it like that, guess I can wear the stupid hat for one day. She laughed, and the sound echoed through the heart of the world like approval. At dawn the next morning, 10 billion souls gathered in the sky plazas, on rooftops, in orbit, on every screen from the core worlds to the frontier. They watched the princess who walked ascend the newly rebuilt diamond dais, this time without a throne, just a simple circle of light. She wore white shot through with living starlight. Beside her walked a human in an orange jumpsuit, sleeves rolled up, boots scuffed, hair defying every stylist the palace had thrown at it for 3 weeks. On his head sat the crown of the consort, delicate crystal lattice that caught the twin suns and threw rainbows across the sky. He looked like he was waiting for someone to yell, "Imposter." Larathiae took his hand in front of the galaxy. The High Archivist, a new one, very young, very nervous, began the ancient words. Do you, Mason Hale of Terra, take this crown and this realm? Mason interrupted, voice carrying clear across the planet. Yeah. I do. But I've got some conditions. A ripple of shock. Then laughter, because everyone had learned. by now that the human did not do tradition quietly. He turned to face the ocean of faces. First, he said, no more curses disguised as blessings. If something's broken, we fix it. No priests, no trials, no leaving little girls chained to chairs for 70 years. Second, schools. Real ones. Teach kids how engines work, not just how to pray to them. Third, if I'm gonna wear this thing, I get a workshop in the palace. Big one. With loud music and bad coffee. He looked at Larathiae. And fourth, I get to keep her. Forever. That's non-negotiable. The silence that followed was vast. Then Larathiae stepped forward, took the crown of the Empress from the archivist's trembling hands, and placed it on her own head. My turn, she said, smiling like the dawn. I accept all conditions. Especially the last. She kissed him, slow, deliberate, unmistakable, in front of every soul who had ever called her untouchable. The Empire didn't cheer. It roared. Crystal spires shattered the sound barrier with pure joy. Starships in orbit fired salute barrages that painted the sky in fireworks for an hour. Later, historians would call it the day the gods learned to kneel. That night, after the feasts and the dancing and the speeches, Masons lasted exactly 11 seconds. Try not to break the planet while I'm asleep, thanks. They stood again on the high balcony. Larathiae leaned against him, crown discarded somewhere hours ago. So, Prince Consort Mason Hale, she teased. How does the crown feel? He reached up, touched the simple band of crystal still in his hair, and shrugged. Like it's waiting for me to fix it. She laughed until she couldn't breathe. In the distance, the burned-out temples were already being rebuilt, this time as schools, hospitals, and one very large, very loud workshop. The Empire had a new story now. Not of a princess saved by a warrior. But of a woman who chose to walk, and a man who refused to let the universe tell her no. And somewhere, far out in the black, an old human salvage tug broadcast a single message on repeat, just in case anyone was listening. This is the hailstorm. Reactors fixed. Princess is walking. Send beer. Years later, travelers coming to Sarathus Prime for the first time always heard the same thing from the docking crews. Look up. See the two figures on the highest balcony? They're always there at sunset. Every single day. Don't stare too long, the consort throws nuts at tourists. And if the light was right, you could just make them out. A tall Sarathian woman with starlight hair and a shorter human man in an orange jumpsuit that had somehow become official court dress. They stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the twin suns bleed violet and gold across the crystal city. 10 years had passed since the coronation. 10 years of changes that rewrote the empire star by star. The old priestly caste was gone. In their place rose academies where Sarathian children learned calculus beside human exchange students, where the word curse was only ever used for broken engines. The diamond dais still stood in the plaza, but now it held a simple metal chair welded to the crystal, Mason's doing. On it was painted in Terran script, property of the people. Sit if you dare. No one ever did. Some legends stay too big to touch. Larathiae never wore the curse again. She wore scars instead, faint silver lines across her spine where the gravitic lock had bitten deepest. She called them her freedom stripes and refused to let healers erase them. Mason never quite got used to being royal. He still answered to, "Hey, wrench monkey," more often than, "Your Highness." The palace workshop echoed with old earth rock and the swearing of apprentices who came from 100 species to learn from the man who fixed gods. They had 2 children. The first, a girl with her mother's height and her father's stubborn brown eyes, was born screaming at the top of her lungs, as if announcing she would never be quiet again. They named her Kalia, which in Old Sarathian meant first step. The second, a boy with silver hair and a human smirk, arrived 3 years later and spent his first hour of life trying to take apart the medical scanner with his tiny fingers. They named him Torin, which meant Little Thunder. Every year on the anniversary of the day the curse broke, the entire empire celebrated the festival of first steps. Cities shut down. People danced in the streets. And at moonrise, Larathiae and Mason would walk, just walk, from the palace gates to the eternal fountain and back. No guards. No hovercar. No crowns. Just two people holding hands while 10 billion watched in reverent silence. On the 10th anniversary, the walk took longer than usual. Because halfway down the crystal causeway, Larathiae stopped. She turned to Mason, eyes glowing soft sapphire in the moonlight, and said the words she had waited a decade to say again. "Lift me." He blinked. "What?" "Like the first time. Lift me. I want to feel it again. I want them to see." The crowd around them, millions lining the causeway, fell hushed. Mason scratched the back of his neck, suddenly shy in a way he hadn't been since the throne room. "I'm not 29 anymore, woman. Back's been acting up." Larathiae smiled the smile that had ended empires and begun new ones. "Please." So he did. In front of the entire watching world, Mason Hale, grease still under his nails, jumpsuit patched at the knees, bent, slid one arm behind her shoulders, the other under her knees, and lifted his wife into the air like she weighed nothing at all. She laughed, bright, incredulous, free, and wrapped her arms around his neck. The causeway exploded into sound. Crystal spires sang so loud windows cracked for 100 kilometers. Starships overhead fired their engines in salute until the sky turned to living fire. He carried her the rest of the way to the fountain, every step steady, every step a promise kept. When they reached the water's edge, he didn't set her down. Instead he looked out at the sea of faces, his family, his people, his impossible life, and spoke the only speech he ever truly meant. 10 years ago, he said, voice carrying without amplification, I fixed a broken machine and found out it had a soul. Best damn repair job I ever did. Laughter and tears rippled through the crowd. Larathiae kissed him, slow, deliberate, the same way she had on Coronation Day, while the twin moons rose behind them. Later, when the children were asleep and the palace finally quiet, they stood on their balcony again. Mason had a small box in his hand, scuffed titanium, the kind that usually held spare parts. He opened it. Inside was the very first face spanner he had used to free her, worn smooth by 10 years of proud display in the Palace Museum. He had stolen it back that morning. I want you to have this, he said. She took it like it was made of stardust. I have everything because of this, she whispered. No, he corrected gently. You have everything because you decided to stand up that day. This was just the wrench. He slipped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Still the best fix I ever made. Larathiae turned in his arms, pressed the spanner between their hearts, and looked out over the city that had learned to walk because she had. Humans, she said softly, echoing words from a lifetime ago, don't just survive. You fix what's broken. You stay. She kissed him under the twin moons, slow and certain. And I will never stop being grateful that you stayed. Far below, in the plaza, the simple metal chair on the diamond dais gleamed under the moonlight. Empty. Forever. Because some stories don't need thrones. They only need two people who refuse to let the universe win. And somewhere, out past the last star the Empire claimed, an old salvage tug still drifted with its running lights on and a single painted line across the hull in fresh white letters, reactor fixed. Princess. Walking. Staying for good. The end.